Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. With ranges up to 150 feet and hoppers that can hold 160 rounds, Pepperball is perfect for controlling large crowds or group disturbances on your yard. Pepperball allows for non-lethal direct impact to control inmates who refuse to comply with lawful orders, and area saturation allows you to achieve buffer zones between groups, or use it for area denial to keep inmates away from security equipment and other accessible areas. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in this show's information guide. Pepperball is the safer option first. Well, welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Jay Lawrie. He also goes by Jay, so that's what I'll be saying as we go through the podcast and the interview. He is the Associate Professor of Criminal Justice, the Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology's chair at Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, Connecticut. So he's also the co-founder of the Corrections Community Network. He retired from the Connecticut Department of Corrections after a 20-year career with the MacDougall Walker Correctional Institution in Suffield, Connecticut. He then joined the faculty at Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, Connecticut, where he serves as the Associate Professor of Criminal Justice. Prior to assuming these positions, he was a criminal justice adjunct faculty member for 13 years at various Massachusetts colleges. He received a B.S. in Political Science and an M.S. in Criminal Justice from Westfield State College, and he also has a Doctorate in Education from the American International College. In 2023, he founded the Corrections Community Network, an online community developed specifically for current and retired correctional, parole, and probation professionals. His mission is to provide hardworking men and women of corrections a supportive community where they can discuss the unique challenges and perspectives only those of us in the field can fully understand. And we're going to have a discussion with him today and learn more about all this. So welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor.
Yeah, we've been talking on LinkedIn a little bit, and so I'm glad to get to have a little face-to-face and learn a little bit about you. So go ahead and tell me about where you grew up and how you made that, how was high school and all that stuff. Give me the brief on Jay.
All right. So I grew up in the western part of Massachusetts, small town called West Springfield. Born in 1970, raised in the 70s and 80s, quiet community at the time. Wasn't much of a student at all. I was an athlete. So made it through high school and went off to college in 1988. Studied political science. Had no idea what I wanted to do. Graduated 4 years later with the aspirations to go into law school and study environmental law. The reality of the cost hit me. I went out one night drinking with some buddies, which is foreshadowing for a lot of decisions in my life. And they asked me if I would be interested in going to take the DOC test for Connecticut. And I had no idea what the Connecticut DOC was, and they explained it was the prison system. I had no law enforcement aspirations in my life, but I figured, how bad could that be? So I went and took the test, and about 8 months later, I was selected, and I started the academy. So like I said, I came into it, I guess, like many people, it wasn't my first choice, but it turned out all right.
Yeah. So what kind of athletics and stuff did you do in high school?
30 years and 90 pounds ago, I was a quarterback and a two-guard. So, like I said, that's pretty much how I spent most of my time. And then, like I said, I got to college and discovered the gym and the free meal plan. All of my athleticism went out, and it just put on about 120 pounds. I got into strength sports, and like I said, I remember when I went for my DOC interview, I was, the joke at the time was they were hiring by the pound. So
absolutely,
at that time it was a little bit different.
Yeah, I was on the same program. So, um,
Yeah.
so political science and environmental, you were going to
Yeah.
go into. What was the thought process at that time? What was the direction you were looking?
None. I mean, there was no real. I don't know. Burlington, Vermont, is a beautiful town, and if you're in the Vermont area, and they have a great campus, and that's what they focused on. At the time, my views were much more left-leaning. When I was in my late teens, early 20s. I thought it was a great idea. It's going to save the world, and
Yeah,
the cruel reality of life hit me, and that was quickly put in the rearview mirror.
right, right. So you get into the Connecticut Department of Corrections, and it sounds
Yes.
like you're kind of like me. Back then, there were lists. You had to get on a list. You had to wait 8 months. Nobody would have to wait 8 months right now to get hired.
No. Oh no. Yeah, it was definitely a process back then.
Yeah. Well, tell me about the academy. What was it like?
Well, the academy, and again, I think most people watch this from a certain generation relate to it. It was typical academy. It was a 12-week, and I think it was about 11 minutes into my first day that I made myself a promise that I wouldn't work a day past 20 because I had to, only if I wanted.
Right.
We were at the time it was 20 and out, full pension, so I started at 23. And I've always said that corrections is somewhat unique in that the day you start, the day you can leave.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things I've done in my life that are not smart. But one of the handful of things I did was I started planning for that. So
Absolutely.
it was my experience. We'll speak more about this. It was my experience throughout the career that a lot of people I worked with never really came up with a plan, and it was something that I thought we need to address. Again, we'll speak more about that. But that
Yeah.
was it. So yes, started the academy, and the realities of it hit home, and went to my first sight sense at a medium security dorm setting, and that was the first time I've ever walked into a correctional setting, and it was, I'm sure, like everybody else, it was incredibly terrifying, and
Right.
asking myself really what you want to do. And then I got assigned to MacDougall Correctional, which at the time it was the largest maximum security facility in New England. So it was a brand new facility. We just opened it, and it was it was like things were in the early '90s. It was a much different career my first 3 years than my last 3 years. So your first three
Absolutely.
years, you're just basically fighting, trying to just physically stay alive. In your last 3 years, you're just fighting, trying not to get sued and left everything you have left after a 20-year career. So,
Yeah, that's pretty
yeah,
much the perspective. Yeah. So,
yeah. So, like I said,
you said it was a little rough, and you're a little nervous. So, what was it that you saw about corrections that kept you in there?
um, again, I think a lot of this, working in higher ed with traditional 18 to 22-year-olds, a lot of this refers to, I think it's a generational thing. When I grew up, my father worked 45 years for the same company, never took
Mm,
a sick day. You know, you weren't supposed to like your job. If you enjoyed it, it was a hobby. It was, so you worked for somebody that's what it was.
right.
So, and it was a career, and you were, so I knew that if I did my 20, I could take care of my family, I could take care of myself. Um, and that's really what it was. It was at that time, I viewed it as a career. What I see today, talking to a lot of the younger staff that started, is they see it as a job. And
Right.
I think that's an important distinction. So again, I am of a generation where you were just, raised Irish Catholic. So, if you had issues with it, you just drank a little more. As long as you're not late for roll call, that's fine. That's pretty much for the first 7 or 8 years. That's pretty much how I got through it.
Yep. No, I think you're on spot. I kind of grew up that way too. My dad joined the fire
Yeah.
department. He stayed there till it was
Mm-hmm.
retirement. And so as soon as
Yep.
I got that first real job, that's kind of what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see much on the resume or the bio there, but to walk me through your progression, were you a correctional officer for the 20 years or?
Yes. So basically, I came in as a CO. So I was a third shift CO for a little while, and we ran MacDougall operated unit management system. So I was a third shift officer, and then that was I couldn't do third shift. I know a lot of people love it. It wasn't for me in any way, shape, or form. I never got used to it. Couldn't do enough push-ups. Couldn't do enough laps around the cell between 3 and 5 a.m. It was killing me. So the only opportunity I had to get off the third was they had a promotion to treatment officer.
Uh-huh.
So I became a treatment officer working in the units on second shift.
Is that
so
like a counselor?
For about 2 years. It's a step between. So it's a step between counselor. So basically, it would be more of an officer role. MacDougall was very unique. Everything in our unit management at that time was all custody. So as a treatment officer, I may be doing funeral trips. I may be doing hospital trips, cell extract. So it was so I went from CTO to classification counselor.
Okay.
But again, in the unit. But MacDougall, it was a really, I had some treatment experience on the classification side, but I mean, I could barely spell RR for regular reviews, much less regular. It wasn't my wheelhouse. So
Sure.
again, it was about 2 years as an officer, 3 years as a little over 3 years as a CTO, a little over 3 years as a counselor, and then I became a unit manager. So I oversaw, depending on at the time, maybe 3 or 4 separate housing units, and that's how I spent my last 10 years. So I retired out of that capacity.
Okay. What was the most shocking thing you saw while a correctional officer? Everybody's usually got one, even though there were probably 100.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know, the first time I cut down an inmate, hanging up, that kind of resonates with me. And I, this is a safe space. So
right.
So now, as I say, to jump in, so I work in higher education. I work at a Catholic college in the Dominican tradition. We have nuns. So going from that environment to this environment, people talk, and the story was I was coming back I was going to my chow break. I'm walking by the block. I hear code purple in me, so I run in. Rover and I go up. I grab, pick him up. They cut him down, and he didn't make it. Or he was very, very bad shape at the time. It was touch and go whether or not I was going to make it. And I just remember, medical showed up, and I stepped over the body and went to chow. And,
right.
And I tell that story to you or this particular population, we can understand that. I tell that story when I got to my new college, and they're like, "Well, how could you do that?"
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to sound as flippant as I'm sure I did, because I said, well, I got 20 minutes to eat, and I got to get back and relieve the rover so he can relieve it. That's just the way it is.
Right.
Medicals, there's nothing more I was going to do. And so I think that's when that was the first time that it really kind of hit me that this is a much different job than most people are accustomed to. And I'm sure, there are a multitude of things that, for whatever reason, I don't know if your brain makes you shut them down, but
Yeah.
It's I don't need to tell anybody watching this what constitutes a normal day in a correctional setting is something.
Yeah. But I do think that's something that the general public doesn't know about our job.
No.
A police officer on the street, if there's an accident, they'll pull cars, they'll throw lights, they'll reroute, all this stuff. That intersection may be closed down for 3 or 4 hours. We can't do that in prison. We got to get this done, get it moved, get it cleaned up, and get the other 1,000 inmates moving again before we have a problem. So, and I think that's part of the rush and part of the normalcy of us just moving past those because we do it so regularly. Go ahead.
Oh no, and that's it. We all I think we all develop our own certainly coping mechanism. Whatever it is that allows you in that particular moment to remove that thought from your head and the reality of what you just did or what you just observed to continue doing what you're supposed to be doing. And maybe later on that night, maybe a week later, at some point in the future, it may or may not hit you. But it definitely takes its toll.
Sure. You say it sometimes hits you. So did you notice changes in yourself, or did other people tell you about those changes that were happening?
I think I noticed them, and I think they were certainly brought to light by various individuals in my life. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, and that's it. I don't know how to articulate what the change was, but you definitely, and you develop those defense mechanisms. For me, and again, for me personally, I'm going to be brutally honest. I bought in hook, line, and sinker. I was all in on that prison guard mentality. That
Hmm.
was, I work with the guys I work with. I went to the gym. I trained with the guys I work with. I went to the bar. I drank with the guys I worked with. You go home, you see your wife, you see your girlfriend, you see your kid, whatever the case may be. You
Hmm.
get a few hours sleep and you go back and you do it again. And for my first 3 or 4 years was a very unhealthy situation for me. Um, again, and that was the norm. No one else could really understand what we went through. Whenever
Yep.
you did go out with a civilian or someone who wasn't in, it was just basically like your question. What's the scariest thing you saw? Is it really like it becomes like you're like a parlor trick, and
Right.
and I had a real hard time processing that. So like I said, up
Uh,
until for me for the first 5 years, so 1998 to jump ahead just a little bit is when I went back to my graduate degree
okay.
and kind of got in higher education arena. And I think that really started to balance me out because I saw that there was more to life than just what I was experiencing.
Exactly. I think that's the number one thing. We've talked to a lot of people, that may have experienced trauma and stress in this job, having an outside focus. And, that's what gets
Absolutely.
a lot of people through it. It's what got me through it, whether it was Scottish Highland Games or whether it was my writing. I had an outside
Yes,
focus, you know.
yes.
So,
I've turned a tabor in my day. I like
have
that.
you?
Nice. Yes. Yes, I
Excellent.
have. Yes, I have. I've
Yeah.
competed.
Excellent. I've never got to go up east, but I know you
Yeah.
guys have some great games up there. Yeah. Wow.
Oh yeah, we had a good one. Yeah, we had a couple of good ones. So yeah, Tennessee I think has a big one. I've always wanted to get out to.
Mm,
But yeah, no, that was a big fan of that.
absolutely. But that outside focus for you became education, right? And that was giving you something
Yeah,
to do after work.
yeah. And there is a great deal of irony there. Again, as I started off, I was never an academic. So I remember going from junior high to high school. My mom worked in the school cafeteria when I was in the junior high, and I remember I was transitioning from junior high to high school, and I had picked my classes, and I had picked pre-college.
Uh-huh.
And my guidance counselor was friends with my mom, and he went down. He had a real heart to heart with her. He's like, "Rita, I got to tell you," he's like, "I just met with Jay, and he thinks he's going to college." And my mom's like, "Well, yeah, that's we all kind." He's like, "I'll be honest with you." He goes, "I really recommend a vocational track," which again, absolutely no knock at all against that. I wish I had a trade,
Yeah.
but the point was, education was never anything I was into. When I went back after having my experience and focusing on an area of criminal justice which I could relate to, I
Yeah.
thrived. I fell in love with it. I absolutely, and I knew, that I was on to something. And yeah, and so I did my 2 years there, and I finished up. And there was a gentleman, probably one of the most impactful people I've ever met, specifically in professional development. His name was Hank DeLuca,
Uh-huh.
and Hank retired from the New York prison system. So Hank started in New York when he came back from Korea. So he went. So at that time, he was raising a family, working in the New York State prison system. He went back. He got his associates, his bachelor's, his master's, and his doctorate from John Jay, which at that time was unheard of.
Yeah.
Just that wasn't a thing.
Sure.
And he was the professor I had for most of my corrections classes. And the last exam I took, he called me in his office after. And he's like, "Hey, Jay," he goes, "just want you to know that you may have heard I'm retiring from the school I was teaching at." I said, "Yeah, Hank, congratulations. You deserve it. Going down to Myrtle Beach." I said, "I wish you the best." He's like, "Thank you." He goes, "I'd really like you to take over for me." And I said, take over what, Hank? What are you talking about? He goes,
Right.
"Have you ever thought about teaching?" He goes, "Have you ever thought about teaching?" And I said, like a professor? And this was absolutely guilty on me. And he said, "Yeah." And I looked at him. I said, "Hank," I said, "I'm a prison guard." I said, I minimized who I thought I was,
Yep.
because that's pretty much what society taught me at that time. You're just, you're not a real cop. You're not, you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? You're a glorified, this was so,
I
and he's
know.
like, no, I really think that, I really think you could do it. So, sort of just to placate him, I'm like, you know what, Hank, yeah, that's great. I said, give my name to the chair. I'm sure he'll be reaching out any day now. And I walked out, didn't give it a second thought. A week later, the chair called me back and offered me the position. So call
Wonderful.
my bluff. Yeah, so that was in 2000, and I started teaching in 2000, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I'm like, this is a great, one company's paying me to do the job, the other company's paying me to talk about it. Like, this is the greatest gig in the world. Absolutely. So, and that's what it was. So I did that for the last 13 years of my career, and I knew it's what I wanted to do when I retired. Um, and again, just to kind of circle back a little, we spoke about earlier, I think, I'm sure it might be similar with you. When I started, a large percentage of the individuals I worked with had a trade: plumbers, landscapers, electricians, carpenters. So what they did was, when Connecticut was hiring en masse, they joined Connecticut, they got the job, they set themselves up for the benefits, they did as little overtime as possible, did their side jobs, and then they retired and went back to what they did.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, I don't have a marketable skill set. So teaching was pretty much, that was like my parole date. If I could get this.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, or fortunately, I knew that if I wanted to do it full time, I needed to have a terminal degree, or a doctorate. So with 4 years left on the job, I was working the prison in the morning, I was teaching in the evening, and I started a full-time doctoral program. So
Wow.
that was absolutely miserable, but I got through it. Again, the good thing about the Irish Catholic guilt and inferiority complex is it fuels me with spite. I'm not saying it's the healthiest way to go, but it's got me through 53 years. So I
Right.
refused to quit, and ended up retiring and finishing up my dissertation 6 months later. And 4 months after that, I got picked up at Albertus. If I had planned this career, never would. I couldn't plan like that. I was very fortunate in how things worked out, and that was it. I was able to leave and get into teaching, and that's how I got here.
Cool. I'm so happy to hear that there's people like you teaching. I'll tell you about my short college experience. I thought for a little bit I would go to college while I was in corrections, and so I took a couple of night classes, and I sat there the whole time listening to people tell me stories, and me thinking, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I couldn't get past that because I was hearing people who didn't have my experience. And I was working at Missouri State Penn at the time, tough place to work. And they were coming in and talking about, ways to rehabilitate. And I'm just, it didn't do me any good. And I eventually just faded out with a couple of hours of college. So that's good and I've met others besides you since then, who are out there, and you're an example. I've been there. I've seen this. I can talk to you about it knowledgeably. So I think that's wonderful.
Thank you. And that's the thing. And one of the things, so I guess one of the things I should kind of mention. So when I was looking to go back to school, I really wanted to find programs to focus on correction. And they exist. All about police, all about fire, hundreds of law schools. I couldn't find anything specific to corrections. So I sort of made myself a promise that if there was ever an opportunity, I would do that. I would tailor my program to correctional staff, because again, no one else is looking at it. A common theme with me is no one else is looking out for us but us. So I was very fortunate when I got to Albertus. We had just gotten approval for a new master's program, and I could add a concentration in correctional administration. So the first thing I added was correctional administration, and then later we added correctional healthcare management. So we are sort of unique in that if there's 5 other schools in the country that focus on corrections, I couldn't name that. And that is, so immediately we developed a relationship with the Connecticut DOC, because that's where I was. And we've been running now for 9 years, and we average about 30, maybe 35 students a year from Connecticut. And to your point or earlier, don't get me wrong, I love my traditional 18 to 22-year-old undergrads. They're great kids, but they can't relate to really, really what I'm talking about.
Right.
What I find academically, that perfect sweet spot for a student is the individual who maybe, if they're looking for undergrad, maybe they struggled in high school. And if you're looking at the masters, maybe they, much like myself, graduated with with an undergraduate degree with a blood alcohol content slightly higher than my GPA, who didn't really focus on school. But they have those 5, 6, 7, 8 years of experience now. Maybe they got their first promotion, and then they're going back to school, and they're thriving. I mean, it's,
Right.
because you have a different perspective, it's relatable. All of our classes, like, they're taught by practitioners who've worked in corrections, who've worked in law enforcement. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And then I know that, this generation is much more receptive to higher education. But it really always bothered me that I could never find programs that focused on corrections. And like you said, maybe it was it was a corrections class taught by a cop who maybe worked a lockup for a couple of shifts, but never.
Right.
My very high baseline for assessing academics is, if you've never been punched in the face, I don't want to hear your story about how to run a block. There's something to that. And yeah.
Yeah. No. Another question that just came to my mind. So what was your dissertation on? I'm interested what you chose.
So interestingly enough, and again, in absolute fairness, I have purged most of it from my memory because it was such a miserable 4 years. But basically, it was why individuals, specifically in law enforcement, choose, and this is kind of way ahead of its time, non-traditional learning methods. So the remote learning. So at that time, obviously way before COVID, but so these programs are just starting out, because traditionally it was the brick and mortar had to be there, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 6 to 8. But as many of us with shift work, that wasn't an option.
Right.
So I looked into that, and a lot of it was, it ended up to be, relevant when COVID hit and everything transitioned to that. But that was what it was. So why individuals like myself would choose to go what at the time was considered a kind of a cutting edge or a new route, rather than that traditional, brick and mortar. And now pretty much everything has gone to that. So I guess it's not too relevant anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you, I had this conversation. I was out of a class in Iowa a few months ago. And another thing you don't see, on like the Post and CLIA, the certifications from the state for law enforcement officers, and some of those are, certifications for correctional officers. You take a look at the board who approves and puts out those classes, and we're not very represented in corrections. It's all former police chiefs. How do we get past that?
Here's my ultimate struggle. So 5 years ago, I had just got promoted to the chair, and I needed to hire a full-time faculty with a background in policing and a terminal degree. So we put the ad out, and I think I got over 750 applicants worldwide.
Wow.
Fantastic. Narrowed down, did we? 3 years later, I needed the exact same position, terminal degree, but a background in corrections. I got 6 people. There were 6 people who met the requirements, having a correctional background and a terminal degree. Now, I say this all the time. I do not mean to imply that higher education is a panacea for all of our issues. I know it's not for a lot of people, and I absolutely respect that. In my position now, to what you just said, I think it's imperative. We don't have enough subject matter experts in academia and consulting and these types of boards, I feel, to accurately represent us. When you look at, one of the biggest issues we're facing as a society is criminal justice reform. One of the largest components is how to address mass incarceration. Well, if you don't have people at that table that know how things actually work, that's a tremendous struggle. One of the examples, and again, it's very, I'm challenged quite a bit because I see, I see things through an academic lens, but I also see it through the practitioner lens. I use the example often about the Norwegian model. So
Yep.
everything, all the talk now is all about, the Norwegian model, and it's fantastic, and I get that. I hear everybody talking about it, but it's a very offender centric approach. What I don't hear people talking about when they want to implement these policies and practices are the fact that Norway requires their staff to attend a 2-year academy with holistic academic standards.
Right.
And my argument is, if you're not going to invest in the education and training for your staff, you're not going to see the sorts of changes you want in that correctional setting. And
Sure.
and that's pretty much how I look at a lot of things.
Yeah.
When people talk about changing the prison climate, I 100% agree and support that. But if you don't focus on the staff, you're never going to get the type of buy-in or success that you're trying to achieve.
Right.
So that's,
and not on your point, but with the Norwegian model, I think something that's forgotten a lot is the level of societal violence difference between Americans and Norwegians. We're dealing with stuff inside that's not even, we're not talking about the same plate.
No. Norway's 98% white and 87% middle class, and their largest, Holstrom prison holds 47 inmates.
Yeah.
So, theoretically, I understand what you're trying to do, but to your point, the socioeconomic conditions, and again, I don't mean that we can't try new things.
Sure.
But I'm always hesitant when we talk about these broad scale applications if they don't focus on staff.
Right.
Like a common theme with me, I am shamelessly pro correction staff.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and again, there's a handful of us, doing this kind of work. And again, if you're talking about police, hundreds or thousands of people out there, but there's only a real handful of us that are focusing on that. And I really think that, because what you mentioned, society doesn't realize what we do. The media does nothing to help us, and quite honestly, sometimes we're our own worst enemies the way we portray it. So if we don't advocate for ourselves and to make the kind of changes I think we need, we're never going to get them.
Yeah. To go back a little bit, and I think you hit it on the head earlier in the interview, but talking about the lack of representation in academia, I find that correctional staff don't understand the skills they have. We're kind of put down. We're kind of told that we're not as smart as everybody else. And just like when you walked in and he said, I'd like you to take over this class. I'm just a hack. I'm just a correctional officer. We learn skills that nobody else can handle. We handle confrontation on a daily basis. Leadership, from the moment you walk in the door, you're leading people that other people can't even think about doing that at other jobs. And I don't know how we get them brought up and show the light to them that you're successful when you're a good correctional officer.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I actually, a couple of weeks back, I did a presentation for the Mid-Atlantic States Correctional Association. And my presentation was on transitioning from your career in corrections. And one of the things that I focus on specifically are, the quote soft skills that we have that we don't realize. I think for me the single biggest is the communication. If you're going to have any success at all in that career for any amount of time, you have to be authentic, you have to be real, and you have to, like you said, you have to be able to read a situation, you have to be able to crisis negotiate, you have to do all those things. And I've said this for years and I stand by it. I think that anybody that works in policing on the street should spend at least 2 years working in a jail or a prison, because you learn that. Again, I mean, not to get into a competition, but you walk into a cell block, you walk into a chow hall, a couple, 200-300 inmates, a rec yard, and you're, as you know, you're outnumbered maybe a couple 100 to 1. You have no weapon.
Sure.
So if you are not an effective communicator, and you are not authentic, and you are not real, they're going to tear you apart. I think for me personally, that's one of the biggest things and I'm so glad you said that. And again, because I am admittedly guilty of it, I immediately sold myself short, because that's what society said. That's what it was. So so one of the things that I really try and advocate is to let people know, what those skills are and how many other things you can do and that's it. A lot of times, I have conversations with people. When I started doing a little bit of research for this topic, I'd meet people, and these are individuals, wardens, deputy wardens, administration, tremendous careers, 20 plus years, and had absolutely no idea what they were going to do when they left.
Mm-hmm.
And that really bothered me because, we're able to retire at a relatively young age. We know our mortality rates are 50. So my thing is, I know the mortality rate is 58. So I'm 53. So I'm doing everything I can to not become one of those statistics. And I think, I think a big part of that for people, and again, I know we're not a monolith. Some people love the job, but some people just hang around because they don't think they have anything else they can do. And I find that really unfortunate because again, when you talk about the dichotomy going from maximum security prison to a Dominican college, I mean, what I've been able, it's been, and again, to what we spoke about earlier, it's completely changed me as a person. The person I was at 25, 26 versus who I am now, polar opposite,
Right.
And like I said, I think that for people that want to make that change, I just want to do whatever I can to help them, realize they can and help them towards whatever that path may be.
Right. Yeah. One of the positive, I guess, things kind of along the line we're talking is that we're needed more now than we ever have been before. Our skills are. Matter of fact, I put out a book last year called the Prison Officer Podcast Job Guide. And in the back, I listed all the agencies. Yeah. And because I tell people now, I just went and took the first job that was closest to the house, but these days you can look through there and they're offering 25% here or 35% bonus there, take those skills and go put them where it helps you the most. So I am glad to see that thought process has changed, that we're valued more than we were back when you and I started.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, back then it was much more clear. So the interesting, over the last 10 years, so when I got, again, Albertus is a very small school. We have my marketing budget is zero. So a lot of my marketing for my academic programs comes through Facebook. And so I've grown a really robust over the last 10 years. I've learned how to use social media. And I've had these conversations with correctional professionals, literally now from all over the world. And I wish I wrote his name down, and I didn't. I spoke one time, there was a sheriff from East Texas. And he was the only person I ever met that said that he actually has more applicants than he has jobs available. He has a surplus of applicants to what he has available. So I don't know what he was doing. I should have written it down because he was out to something. But other than that, as I mean, hiring rates, retention rates, they're abysmal.
Right.
And again, I think a lot of that just goes back to, if we can begin to change that culture somehow and have staff have more of a buy-in and be more of a factor in that, where, in our day, it was a very authoritative approach to how things were done. And I think as these new generations come in, that the way that you have to deal with staff now are much different. I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's worse. I'm just saying it's the way it is. So if you don't engage, I find myself now, even as a professor, 23 years ago, I didn't need to explain myself as much as I do now. And, talking to people, in supervisory positions, I would never have thought, when I first started as an officer, if a lieutenant or a captain told me to do something, ask them why. That thought never would come to my mind. But that's a theme now. So we're dealing with a different population, so we need to be real about it.
Yeah. And they want to know why. And it's not in a mean way, and it's not in a dismissive way. It is, I want to understand. And I don't know how we get some of our staff to look at it that way. You probably hear it. I hear it. Staff say, well, they won't listen to me. I'm not talking to them anymore. There's nobody else to do this job, people. You've got to get them on board. You've got to train them. So let's get back to academia a little bit, because I'm interested. And we talked. We talked on email a little bit. So you've been doing this many years, over 20. How has the teaching changed that you're doing inside the college? Have the classes changed? What are they teaching them in there that? I hit a spot,
So
did I?
no, well, no. So here's the thing. So personally, I've been very fortunate in the schools that I've been at personally have allowed me the autonomy to basically teach my classes in the way that I feel they should be taught.
Oh, cool.
I have had I have had some situations where, oftentimes, criminal justice in a lot of schools falls under sociology. So the
Right.
department is sociology, and the program is criminal justice. And again, at Albertus, that's how it is. And I mean this, and also in the 10 years I've been there, I've never had any issues with colleagues or anything like that. But I have had previous experiences, other schools, where they've just told me flat out, we don't think criminal justice. Not only do we think criminal justice should be a major, but specifically, teaching people how to be a prison guard, or just very derogatory,
Hmm.
the toxic masculine. And again, I mean, I'll be. This is what I look like. This is, and I know I don't look like a regular academic, but that whole, like, judging what the field is. I talk to a lot of my colleagues, and they do struggle with it because it's a challenge, and I realize, especially in the last 3 or 4 years with COVID, it's a little bit of a challenge because these kids coming into high school, coming into college from high school, have much different experiences than we did. So we do.
Yeah.
I find myself, I need to be. I don't make assumptions about what a student does or does not know.
Sure.
I had a class a couple weeks ago, and I referenced Roe versus Wade, and one student in class knew what that was. So, where
Wow.
historically, yeah, two ways to cross a river? No, but
Uh,
so you try and figure out, so how do I have a conversation about Supreme Court precedents with the abortion issue if they have no idea what the abortion issue is? So I find myself having to go back, and I don't know if I mean remedial, but
yeah.
again, just having to spend a little more time covering things that historically would have been general information by the time they got to college. So that's a little bit
Yeah.
of a struggle, I think. But it's just, again, it's just a different approach.
Do they get any? Is there any internships available? Do they get to go on tours?
Oh,
Maybe see a correctional center, anything like that?
we require it for our undergrad students. You have to do at least one internship, and depending on what their field is, we said. So here's, and again, so this is an interesting thing. So I've been teaching for 23 years, and 7 years ago, I had a young lady, and this was beginning of every intro to CJ class. I go around the room, tell me who you are, where you're from, what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
In the 23 years I've been doing this one young lady was the only person, when I said, "What do you want to do?" She goes, "I want to be a CO." Like, everybody wants to work in the FBI, the DEA. Nobody, in my experience, maybe it's a Northeast thing, I don't know, but
Yeah.
corrections was never anybody's first choice. So I was
Yeah.
I was thrilled. But so not a lot of people. We average. I think we've had.
Did
I
she
think
know what it
since I've been
was?
in. Oh no, she knew, and she didn't. And normally, yeah, yeah. Normally, I know for a lot of people it's generational. Like my father worked in prisons, my grandfather worked, my uncle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't really the case. She had no ties to it. That's just what she wanted to do. And what's amazing, 2 years ago, because we go to all the academies. Whenever the Connecticut DOC graduates class, we go because we offer educational incentives, and we go to let them know. And she was there,
Uh-huh.
so she had graduated, and it was really. I mean,
Wonderful.
this always sounds a little, yeah, this always sounds a little bit corny, but I really mean it. I think you can relate to it. One of the things I really struggled with in corrections is I never felt a tangible reward for what I did. In
Uh-huh.
my mind, the way you measure successful days, if everybody you're in roll call with leaves at the end of the shift without getting hurt, there's no major services, that's a good day. But
Mm-hmm.
again, getting back to, I wish I had a skill set. I wish I were a carpenter. You show up in the morning, there's a pile of wood. You leave at the end of the day, you framed out a garage. So you can
Right.
see what that doesn't really exist in corrections, in my in my view, for me personally.
Sure.
But there's something really awesome about when a student reaches out to me. This was probably 5 years ago, so it's about 18 years after I had the student in class, and they worked in the correctional system up in New York State. Hadn't spoken to the person in 18 years. Didn't even really remember them. But they've gotten in touch with me, and they sent me an email, and they're like, "Hey, Lawrie, just want you to know this is where I'm working. I don't remember anything about your class except the one example I used. He goes, that same exact situation happened to me. I remember when you talked about it and X, Y, and Z. And there's something really cool about it. You had an impact on someone's life like that. So to see her graduate and go through and that's, again, it's something that it would occasionally happen in corrections, but certainly not with any frequency that, it would be, noticeable.
Right. Well, that's great. So I don't want to run out of time here.
No, absolutely.
You co-founded the Corrections Community Network. Tell me about that.
Yes. So again, this all kind of runs, and this was all of my research. Like I said, all these contacts I had, I started talking to a lot of people about different things, and it kind of led me to the presentation I did on career transition, because nobody was talking about that. And I'm like, boy, I really wish someone, I wish I had this information back when I was getting ready to retire. This would have made my life maybe easier. And then my wife and I we co-founded together. We started talking about it. I'm like, boy, there's a lot of things that if I had known when I started, my life would have been much different. So the CCN thing, literally 8 weeks ago, was our first conversation about how to do this. So she works in digital media. So, we put together a website and have an app. And basically it's what I envision, is so basically it's like Facebook meets a resource center. So it's a place for current or retired corrections, parole, probation to kind of come together, discuss issues, discuss events in a much more like supportive kind of way. And then we have, like I said, there's an app, and we have different categories. We're still building our content. But there's a section on physical health, on mental health. One of the big things that stuck with me was we have a section on family relationships. So when I retired, I retired and I was home, and I was home all the time, and I would see my family all the time. When I wasn't seeing my family for 20 years. And the house ran great without me there all the time. But when I was, and I started having, because I have this natural tendency of maybe, what you're doing here is good, but what if we start changing the flow, and they're like, listen, this house has been running for 20 years without you here. And again, just ways in which, and again, I'm all about full disclosure. This is my third marriage, so I wish that people talk to me about, the statistics say that that's normal, but what do we do to avoid that? So, we have wellness coaches, we have happiness coaches, we have divorce lawyer. I mean, we have all of the resources that I could think of we could think of from as many areas as possible, kind of in one place. So that's, we that was the idea, and we put it together. And like I said, we've been live for about a week now. And and again, it goes back, I think, and I know there are a lot of organizations. Corrections One is a great organization, and CLA is a great. In my experience, a lot of those groups focused on the profession of corrections. Our goal, is to focus on the individual. I think a lot of times, in my experience, people kind of view this as a monolith, and it was all about the field of corrections, but nobody really cared about the individual. So that's, kind of what we're hoping to do, is just provide a place.
And with other people that understand what you're talking about. I'm very unique. Yeah, because when I retired, I got to go to work for Pepperball, and so I travel, and I get to go out and hang out with cops. I get to go out and hang out with correctional officers, and I get to have this visit with these guys, every couple or few weeks. And I know a lot of the people that I know that have retired, you get isolated because you're used to having that group around you. So I think that's a great idea to have a place where they can go talk to people that understand what they're talking about, not people who are talking to them, which is kind of like what I talked about with the first, criminal justice professor. You don't understand what I've been through. So,
yeah. And more, and I think you're 100% right, and more so, someone who's willing to listen. So it's funny. So a lot of the feedback we got, we're looking, and again, we want to make it as broad and as possible in what we offer. One of the biggest things that keep coming up is mentorships. A lot of people, so a lot of the staff I talk with that are retired want to be mentors. A lot of the people I talk with, so our tagline, I came up, like from cadet to commissioner. So in our utopian society, like everybody, you kind of leave your titles at the door, but and that's it. Is people, a lot of people kind of like us have all this experience and wisdom and whatever that we want to sort of impart, but also what we can learn about how different things are now. That because I don't have I joke that I hadn't been back in the facility for the 10 years since I retired. I'm teaching these classes. I'm like, well, I should at least go back and see if prison's still like I remember it. And I'll be honest with you, it's not. I mean, the facility, the facility that I worked at, it's the same facility, but it's a completely different climate and culture. And like I said, I think if we can have that mix of individuals, then that just makes it, again, better for everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that. I still get to go inside once in a while, and the thing I notice the most anymore is that I see a lot of inmates sitting around. And when I was in corrections, inmates that didn't have something to do were dangerous or would become dangerous for me.
Yes.
And so there was always work. There was always, our job as a housing unit officer was to keep people busy. If I could keep them out of their cells and up doing something, I did. And I don't know if that's just something I'm noticing or if it's really something that's going on in there, but I see a lot of inmates, they'll be lined up in chairs next to the wall waiting for this or waiting for that. And I don't know. It's a change in our culture or what's going on, but I've noticed that lately.
100%. And again, so earlier I was making references to, like this generation of correctional officers, and I did not at all mean it to be derogatory. It was just my perception. But the same thing is that same population, like the types of inmates that you and I started with, the convicts, like that, it's changed. It's a different, the way you could interact with them is now different. The unique outside the box ways you may have dealt with individual situations. You may have had
the
a
vocabulary.
Little more autonomy. Exactly. Yes, exactly. It's different because, and again, my observations, it was, they, and then maybe this is just me, they tend to take things a lot more personally now. Like I was, the idea of being offended never crossed my mind because that's sort of what the job was. Again, not saying it's right. Again, maybe if it was different, I'd be in a different situation in my life. But again, all we can do is compare it to what we know.
Sure. Well, that's great. Anything else going on you want to talk about?
No, like I said, I think I love the work you're doing. I think, like I said, I think there's not a lot of us advocating for correction. So if anybody out there is interested, like I said, we can use all the help we can get. And like I said, just like to thank you for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, I'll put links in the notes here, but tell people if they want you to speak or if they want to get a hold of the Corrections Community Network, give me some of the places they can go to get in contact with you.
Absolutely. If you'd like to speak further, JNLAWRIE at albertus.edu is my work email, and CORRCOMM.net, corcom.net abbreviated, is our website. Please, check it out, see what you think. And this is so that if you do check it out and you're not interested, that's fantastic. If you don't mind, just shoot me some feedback. I have no issues, hearing critical reports. Like I said, we've never done this before, so I'm not a big fan of. I'm not used to hearing a lot of praise. So, like I said, if there's something we should do different, if there's something you'd like to see, or if there's any way you think we may be able to collaborate, please feel free to reach out.
You can take criticism. You only have one feeling, right?
That's
That's what we used to say in corrections. You can't hurt my feeling, my one feeling.
exactly.
So,
yeah, that's it. That was, yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been great meeting you, Jay, and thanks for coming on the Prison Officer Podcast. And maybe we'll do a follow-up episode, and let's see how this. I'm excited about your corrections community network.
Greatly appreciate it. Again, thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You as well.
I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer Podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.